a bit disgraceful. Got loads of etc. Yes, I'm sure. I mean, like for everybody getting here is challenging. So yeah,
Please take a seat. Those of you who are here for the event on the agriculture breakthrough, please take a seat and we will start in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for a few more people to come in and some technical issues to be resolved. Please come on in for learning more about the agriculture breakthrough. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to this session. Please come on in. We have the session on the agriculture breakthrough. That's the one you're looking for. It's good to see a good number of people. I hope some more will join. So my name is Danish Dinesh. I'll be the moderator for this event. I work for an organization called CIAT. CIAT is a new organization, so you may not have heard of us. You know, we were just launched at COP26, and we are a think and do tank on food and climate. So what we're trying to do is to connect the food and climate communities together and connect science and policy. We're based in the Netherlands at the Netherlands Food Partnership, and yeah, this is our first Substa, so if you want to talk to us about collaboration, you can meet me later. But this event really is connecting the climate and food agendas. So as you know, there is a looming global food crisis out there as a result of the war in Ukraine. And how do we overcome this? This is the question that I've heard from many people today. And what we want to do in this particular session is to explore the role of the agriculture breakthrough. And many of you may be aware, and you'll hear from Gerard soon more about the agriculture breakthrough, but I was at COP26 in Glasgow, and one of the real highlights for me was the agriculture breakthrough and the breakthrough agenda at large, because we've been seeing a lot of action which are incremental in nature. So how can we move beyond that and really get a breakthrough in agriculture and as well as other 4 priority sectors? And we can only do that by bringing stakeholders together. So the purpose of this event is to bring stakeholders together onto that journey around the agriculture breakthrough. But before I hand over to Gerard Howe, who's the head of Adaptation, Nature and Resilience Department at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, I would like to wish you all a happy World Environment Day. So yesterday was World Environment Day, so let's take a moment to just reflect on that, because it was under the theme of only one Earth. You know, and we are all here. We are here to discuss the breakthrough. We are here to hear from you. But we're all here for that only one Earth that we all are working towards in this meeting room. So that's important to reflect on that. So maybe without much delay, I'll hand over to you, Gerard, so you can introduce the agriculture breakthrough and invite stakeholders to be part of this journey.
Thanks so much, Danush, and welcome and congratulations to CIAT as well. It's great to see new organisations emerging, and I really like your think and can do approach that. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends. It's a pleasure to be here. So on behalf of the UK, I'll be brief, but what I really want to do is just to underline the importance that we attach to the agriculture breakthrough and encourage, as people already are, as much participation and engagement in the breakthrough agenda as is possible. It's also really nice to see people in person, and we know that can make a qualitative difference to what we can achieve. I don't need to share with colleagues here just what is happening in terms of rising temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, and the damage that is doing to our ecosystems and the threats to our food production and the systems around that. But we all know that increased demand for land to keep up with food needs is really further putting pressure on biodiversity, that we've got unsustainable agricultural practices that contribute to increased greenhouse emissions, land degradation, and lead to increased competition for resources and further land expansion in what we all know is a vicious cycle. And now the impacts of COVID-19 and the impacts of the war in Ukraine are adding serious further risks to already extraordinarily fragile global food security context. And without concerted action, we know that this problem is just going to get worse and worse. So COP26 in my hometown in Glasgow was an important milestone, and the UK hugely appreciates the leadership and the vision that so many people in this room and outside of it showed during that summit to keep the Paris Agreement alive and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. But now, and we all know this, 6 months away from that point in Glasgow and 6 months towards the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we have to continue to turn those commitments into action on the ground to show the world that we have credible commitment, credible plans to moving forward and making good on our commitments. And the context for all of us today is of the agriculture and the sector and their food systems around it. We know the agricultural sector is responsible for 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. It is the primary driver of biodiversity loss, the primary user of fresh water, and a major driver of tropical deforestation. And agriculture, far more than any other sector actually, contributes to both adaptation and mitigation, a huge opportunity. And so therefore, transforming agriculture can simultaneously promote climate resilience, reduce emissions, increase productivity on existing land, and support livelihoods and poverty reduction and dignity, thereby reducing the pressures on unsustainable resource use. And importantly, we've now got a framework that puts agriculture innovation at the very core. So at COP26, the UK announced an agricultural breakthrough goal to make climate resilient, sustainable agriculture the most attractive and widely adopted option for farmers everywhere by 2030. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from colleagues about what that might mean and look like in Africa. But the overall breakthrough agenda is an unprecedented international clean technology plan to help keep 1.5 degrees in reach. And over 45 world leaders signed up to the breakthrough agenda at Glasgow, including the US, India, China, developing economies, and some of the countries most vulnerable to climate change, who together represent 70% of the world's economy and every region. The agenda enables countries and businesses to work together to accelerate the deployment and the development of clean technologies needed to meet our goals, all of our goals, and importantly, ensuring they're affordable and accessible to all. It aims to strengthen international collaboration in the energy, road, transport, steel and hydrogen sectors. And the agricultural breakthrough is actually the next step in this journey, bringing a much needed focus on the sector-wide transition needed over this decade. The breakthrough will track progress against a clear 2030 vision, including by placing agriculture on par with other big emitting sectors such as energy and transport in the global debates on climate change, growth and nature. And I'm sure everyone in this room recognises how important it is that agriculture is seen in that same space and taken with that same degree of commitment. Current agricultural technologies only deliver at best around 40% of the mitigation that we needed. So we do not have the solutions that we require. We need new investments in science to develop new technologies, and in addition to identifying and scaling the ones that we already have. So the breakthrough aims to drive accelerated action, investment and partnership by amplifying and reinforcing coordination between existing initiatives. It recognises there's already a lot happening, but together we can create something that is greater than sum of the parts. Those existing initiatives include the US and UAE-led Agriculture and Innovation Mission for Climate, which is delivering increased investments in agriculture research and investment, and the Global Action Agenda for Innovation in Agriculture, which will produce an outline plan to transform agricultural innovation. The agricultural breakthrough will facilitate targeting and delivery of those investments around a set of key priorities aligned with the needs of countries most impacted by climate change. And since the launch in Glasgow, the UK has been working closely with the UN high-level champions, as well as the International Energy Agency and the International Renewable Energy Agency. We've established a global checkpoint mechanism that allows us to track progress and to ensure accountability, two really key areas in this field. And to this end, a State of Sectoral Transition report, including agreed indicators on agriculture, is being developed. And we will launch that report ahead of COP27. Through this process, we're also bringing together over 200 organisations from the research, farming and private sector communities to embark in the transformation of the sector towards 2030. And we've been working to build country support and demand. So we hope, all of us here, that many more of you will join us in endorsing the goal of the agriculture breakthrough. We saw new signatories at Stockholm Plus 50 recently, which is extraordinarily welcome. And by so doing, participate in the global checkpoint mechanism and support the initiatives involved to drive the radical transformation of our agriculture and food systems to equally work for people, for climate and for nature. We know the original green revolution last century boosted food production and lifted millions out of poverty. We all know we now need a green revolution for this century, and that actions are more urgently needed than ever before. So thank you very much indeed. We look forward to the discussions today and to the actions over the coming months and years. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Gerard. I think that's a really appropriate message for World Environment Day as well, reflecting on the progress that we've made in terms of the green revolution, but how can we step up to the challenges that we face now? And as you outlined, biodiversity loss, climate change, the issues that we're facing at the moment, and how the breakthrough can be a mechanism to do that. So thank you for setting that scene, and thank you for inviting people to join that journey, because as Gerard mentioned, we can only do this if we bring together research organizations, farmer organizations, private sector, all the different stakeholders together. And that's what we're trying to do, to explore in this session, is how can we do this for Africa? So you can see amongst the panelists today, and I'll introduce them one by one as we speak. We have a research organization, the University of Leeds. We have the CGIAR system, the international system for agriculture research globally, but represented specifically by the ICRA program, which focuses on Africa. We have Jacqueline from the government of Kenya. We have Ishmael representing the Southern African Farmers Organization, so representing farmers in 16 Southern African countries. So what we're trying to explore here is, we have this vision of the breakthrough. We have the challenge of the food crisis looming over in front of us. How can we bring these stakeholders together to make the breakthrough work, particularly in Africa? So that's what we'll be exploring, and we'd really want to make this interactive and bring you on board so that we can collectively work together in the lead up to COP27, which is an Africa COP, to make the breakthrough real. So to set the scene, to hear more from a scientific perspective, and the role of a research organization, I'd like to introduce Professor Andy Challinor, who's the professor for climate impacts at the University of Leeds. And he's had an illustrious career. He was the lead author of IPCC work, fifth assessment report. He's published widely, but what I also really like about him is he's really focused on impact and behavioral change, and how that can be a lever to achieve the changes that we'd like to see. And so show us some of those, Gerard called for more investment into science and innovation, but where should these investments go? What sort of projects should they fund? And how can these projects deliver not just research, but impact for society and for climate? So Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks very much. That was a really nice introduction, because it really brings out, I've written research perspective on this first slide, but actually this is about the evidence base, building the evidence base, and working with those people who can deliver change. It's not just about academics publishing papers. Do I need to?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully you heard enough about that. I basically said what Danush just said. So a little bit just at the start about science and policy. And, we've known for a long time, this newspaper article is from pre-pandemic. Global food system is broken, say World Science Academies. So, we've known this even before that. Sorry, I should have said to Vita, please press the next slide so that we don't get out of sync. Thank you, Gerard.
So that article is now 3 years old, but actually I think we've known that kind of for a long time. But I think now the research is really starting has really started to catch up with that and to be able to look more deeply into the food system and its interactions with climate. So, and certainly in my experience with the IPCC, with a special report on climate change land, and certainly in AR6, I think there's a really clear demonstration of how looking at adaptation and mitigation, for example, together, really can bring us a fuller picture, and looking deeply into also supply chains as well. So, it's shown really clearly that adaptation can have a huge range of co-benefits for food security and for the full range of SDGs. And I really do think the IPCC assessment report trajectory is really helping drive that greater integration of science and society. And I promise not to kind of blind you with too many figures. This one is kind of deliberately, it's one of the summary figures from the IPCC. You probably can't even read it properly at the back. I can't read it properly on my screen. That's not the point. You can probably recognise the SDG logo on the right-hand side. So you've got the 12 SDGs. So we've got, food in one of those columns. And what they're identifying here is the co-benefits with all these various aspects on the left of land and ocean ecosystems, urban infrastructure and environment, energy systems. And this is just one of a number of these kind of summary figures and of course a depth of research behind that are really unpicking these interlinkages. So the research has really come on certainly in the time that I've been working in this area and trying to provide the evidence base for making a difference. So a summary of these kind of opening remarks. I think, food, from the IPCC perspective, food's a real exemplar of the role of climate as part of much larger interacting systems, which, and we've already heard, COVID, Ukraine, important in many ways and important in sort of narrower ways from the perspective of the way they interact with the other stressors, of course, including climate and our political systems. And I would argue the kind of model-centric and even climate-centric approaches are now of limited value, so research has really broadened out beyond that. So therefore, lots of opportunities across policy and decision-making to deepen the progress that's been made. And the challenge really is how can science and policy work more closely together now that this opportunity is really growing in its scope. So I wanted to just highlight one case study of that from work at Leeds as part of UK funded GCRF AFRICAP project, and this is work that we will be continuing under the CIAT in the climate project, and indeed interacting with ICRA also. And here we've called this essentially it's an integrated assessment framework. It's about using models, but actually using a whole range of experts and using some of the sort of uncertainty language and knowledge language that's behind the IPCC assessments to really, and work with stakeholders to really make statements about model output to make sure that they're making that extra step towards relevance. So I'll just talk through this bubble diagram a little bit. In the project, we had a series of scenario workshops at the start, participatory scenario workshops where we asked stakeholders what were they concerned about in terms of the future scenarios for their countries. This was for 4 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And I'll show some examples from Zambia. Climate change, climate risk came out consistently as one of them, and various things about either market connectivity in the case of Zambia or increased agricultural technology, for example, came up in other countries. So these are areas in which these countries already have policies that they are implementing and perhaps want to know what the benefit of these policies are and how resilient are they to climate change. So based on these scenario workshops, we did a whole bunch of integrated modelling, produced at this kind of summary level. I can just tell you a bunch of maps and numbers. I mean, us scientists and modellers love all that kind of thing, but I'm not here to talk about the depth of that. Then we had a series of integration workshops back with the stakeholders and a wider group and a whole range of research and practitioners from the AFRICAP project and from beyond to work out what the implications of these model outputs were. Not to leave that to producing a paper or even a report, but actually to do that in a workshop environment to produce a series of documents that come later on, and an online research, an online results portal, which I'll show you the address for later on. So a summary of that process, if you like, or the end result of that process is in this triangle. literally millions of model simulations across 4 different scenarios per country, leading to over 1,000 implication statements based on those, and then a series of country policy documents and scenario documents that really break down the details of that, and then one place where all of that can be visited. And throughout, of course, the stakeholder input and stakeholder exchange, really important through the use of policy workshops and in-country task forces. And what we discovered here was actually, as much as the end product, what was really useful was our policy engagement throughout the project, where we were, through our partners, FANRAPAN, we were learning what, and elsewhere, we were learning what the current policy debates and dialogues and current policies are, and we had conversations with South Africa's Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on agriculture, with the Agricultural Master Plan, Malawi's Vision 2063, and Zambia's oilseed diversification strategy. So all of this was really integrating the modelling with the wider research and with the stakeholders throughout the process. So just a snapshot of one sort of summary diagram from all of that. This is results from Zambia, and where we highlight under 5 different categories: productivity, adaptation, mitigation, nutrition security, and extent of climate risk, or a number of climate hazards within that climate risk category. So these 4 large boxes you can see with these coloured rectangles in them, those are the quadrants of the scenarios that we looked at. So high versus low climate risk is left versus right, and high versus low market connectivity is the top versus the bottom. So apart from the reds and the ambers, which might, the first thing maybe that jump out at you, that we don't really solve all of Zambia's problems with any of these scenarios, which I think is perhaps important information. But what we can see in the high climate risk scenario here is the adaptation. Actually, we start to see a significant improvement. And this is because our stakeholders told us, well, under a high climate risk scenario, if this is what is known to happen, then these are the likely, I won't go into full detail, but this is the likely kind of arena in terms of what land use policy, agriculture and investment will look like. And the result of that is that quite a good job is done of adapting to climate change. So that's because there is that high risk, there's also that sort of response. And the other thing that comes out from this, if you look at the nutrition security box, which is that yellowy amber in three cases, but actually in one of the cases, sorry, I've got that wrong, it's red in 3 of the cases, and in the top right, the nutrition security box is amber, showing that when there's high climate risk, but also high connectivity, nutrition security outcomes actually improve at the country level as a result. So I'm hoping I haven't been too general in what I've presented. I wanted to be sure not to be too deep. As I've emphasised, there's millions of model runs and stakeholder interactions kind of behind all this. But just one more element to show the depth of the research and to show what's possible now by working with the FAO food balance sheets and with an analysis of how domestic production and international trade interact with each other. We were able to look at a micronutrient level at what the outcomes were in all of our countries, in all of their 4 scenarios. And this again is contrasting those 2 of those scenarios that I've just talked about, so high versus low climate risk for Zambia under high market connectivity. So the case on the left was the amber case in the previous schematic, and where you can see kind of what's under the bonnet with that is that 11 micronutrients improve under that situation because of this adaptation to climate change, and 2 worsen, and it's more or less the other way around under low climate risk because these adaptations aren't put into place. So thanks, Vita. You're doing well keeping up with my mistaken belief that you are actually a spacebar when you're a human being. If you could just skip, if there's time for a personal perspective, or like very last slide, please. It should look like that. All academics love to talk about their pet projects, but actually I think this, in this context, is really important, and do stop me if you need to, scientists and their pet projects. This actually comes from, originated in a way in the work of Ken Wilber, a philosopher, who's really trying to look at the big picture in many different ways, but we're applying it here, so this is working with a team, working with a transpersonal psychologist. I think we've got a theologian on board now and a bunch of food systems people. But this is looking at the kind of really big picture of how change happens, right? So left versus right is internal versus external. Left upper quadrant is what goes on inside the individual, if you like. This is the psychology. So I'm a physicist by training, but I've realised the importance of the psychological kind of elements where climate anxiety and denial and all of these things kind of live, or indeed the kind of the desire and the ability to act. So the external behaviours that result from that are in the top right. And then in the bottom, we've got the sort of cultural and systemic views. So the interior of a system is the culture, if you like, various cultures. Here at Substo and UNFCCC, there is a particular culture. In University of Leeds, we have our own culture. In each institution, CLIMI has its own culture as a collective, but it's the way in which that externally represents itself in interaction with other systems that really is how change results. So this is something I'm working on at the moment. Get in touch if you're sort of interested in more. It's a live area I just cheekily wanted to show a little bit at the end. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Andy, but you're not done yet. I have a quick follow-up question to you. So we've heard from Gerard about the breakthrough, and that's this huge ambition to increase investment in innovation, get innovations out there, address the challenges that we're facing around food security, around climate change, biodiversity loss. And I liked your pet project where you're bringing in elements of psychology, culture. How do you see that fitting into that breakthrough narrative? What do we need to do? Tell us that. Scientists like coming up with problems. What's the solution? What do we need to do?
Well, don't know, surprise, surprise. I think the the solution is more research in that space. But that's a kind of, in a way, I haven't sidestepped. Maybe I could say a little bit more about that. In that, most of us aren't used to operating in that space where we're thinking about, what's going on in our psychology, if you like, internally, and in the cultures, the various cultures and the various kind of organisations in various hats that we have. So I really think a lot can be gained by doing that, and I've certainly gained a lot from doing that, a much broader understanding of the problem than has come from just sitting with models and producing graphs, which I find very interesting and I find can be very important, but it's actually in the conversations where these things are joined up. So I think we will be able to get a better understanding of solutions once we understand that space better of how our various organisations interact and result in kind of, if you like, externally visible aspects of food systems. So, supply chains are going to be critical in that, or are critical in that, and having conversations with business about their supply chains and about accountability across supply chains is one really obvious, concrete thing, I would say, to come out of that. But there are going to be billions, I'm sure.
Thanks, Andy. And I personally recently finished my PhD looking at research institutions and how can we make them more effective, focused on CGR as a case study. And one of the quotes that came out, and that's like the summary of my PhD, is someone told me, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, it's like you can have the perfect strategies around getting innovations out there, but unless you have the right culture within an institution, you won't be able to do it. So thanks, Andy, for highlighting also the solution space where we need to move towards to get that culture right to achieve the breakthrough. But now let's hear from a different perspective. We've heard from Advanced Research Institute, the University of Leeds, moving on to the CGR, which is the International System for Agricultural Research, and specifically focused on Africa. So there is a ICRA, Accelerating the Impacts of CGR Research in Africa, is a project of the CGR funded by the World Bank. It's a $60 million project, runs for 3 years, and it's about accelerating impact and applying research for development impacts in Africa. So to hear more on how ICRA is working in the context of this breakthrough in Africa, I'm going to hand over to Rhys Bucknell-Williams, who's a global lead for communications at ICRA, and he's stepping in on behalf of ICRA's director, who was unable to make it because of flight cancellation. Over to you, Rhys.
Yeah, thank you, Danish. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's been fantastic to hear from our speakers, from Gerard, from Andy. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to talk a bit about ICRA, which stands for Accelerating Impacts of CGIAR climate research for Africa, and how we feel that ICRA is kind of one of the projects that can maybe embody the kind of agriculture breakthrough, specifically in the African context, and why we're backing the breakthrough. So I'll go back to the beginning. So CGIAR, I'm sure many in this room are familiar with the CGIAR, the world's largest research partnership for food security and agriculture, been going for 50 years, a long history of lots of innovations and science being driven by the organization. And for a decade, we had a research program specifically on climate change, agriculture, and food security. I was really thrilled to join we call it CCAFS for short. I was really thrilled to join the CCAFS team a couple of years ago. And here you have a picture from the team from the final science meeting that they had in Spain. I was unfortunately not able to attend, but I heard it was quite a good party at the end of that. But lots of science and discussions on the research they're doing. Obviously, the CGIAR at the moment is going through some major changes, transformation to one CGIAR. But the legacy of the work that was led by CCAFS has spurred a lot of new projects and initiatives across the new one CGIAR. And that includes ICRA. And so ICRA is really kind of taking the mantle of the work on climate-smart agriculture and climate information services that was led under CCAFS, but focuses down on Africa. So ICRA has three objectives. Thank you, Vita. So essentially strengthening the capacity of CGIAR centers that continue, its partners and many of our stakeholders to promote climate information services and climate-smart agriculture. We want to enhance the access to climate, to these information services and to climate-smart technologies. And we want to spur more innovation and improve the capacity of our partners to generate knowledge, to transfer knowledge, to make decisions using the tools we developed, and to validate these climate-smart technologies in different contexts and different countries and against different challenges. So there's one headline figure, which is that we want to reach 1.5 million farmers across Africa by the time that we wrap up our first phase, which is the end of 2023. And you can go on our website and you can see our annual report where we kind of signal how far we're getting on different parameters there. So we focus down on 6 countries. So there's Senegal, Ghana, Mali, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Zambia. And the idea being that while CCAFS is very much a global team, ICRA will kind of focus its energy on these 6 countries to try and really accelerate change and really to build those partnerships far and wide and very deep in those countries to make change happen very quickly. But as you can see from this graph, we also have a regional component. So we have 2 team members who work at the regional level, so West Africa and East and Southern Africa as one region. And this is really quite an important element of the ICRA sort of philosophy, because we really want to see the innovations that we're trying to deploy spread on a regional basis. We want to see spillovers into other countries and to other challenges across the regions in which we're working. So this is a really important component of what we do. Vita, next one, please. And so if you go on the ICRA website, you can see that we organize our work sort of by country, but we also have then some themes that drive our work. So there's knowledge that's sort of driving more research into the climate smart technologies, innovation, which is about actually then making sure that other way around. So innovation is about driving more knowledge about climate smart agriculture and technologies. Knowledge is about helping farmers and other organizations to take up those innovations. Partnerships is about deepening the partnership between CGIAR and other organizations to deploy these. And then obviously looking at the gender and social inclusion aspects of all the work that we do. Thank you. Next slide, Vita. Yeah. So I've mentioned partnership a few times, and this diagram sort of just demonstrates the kind of the breadth and depth of the partnerships that we follow under ICRA. And there's a lot to take on there, but this kind of just shows like the number of partners that we work with, including national agencies, universities, regional bodies, continental bodies, civil society, the private sector, and of course across the one CGIAR, all the new initiatives. Andy mentioned climate earlier. This is one of the other new one CGIAR initiatives, and we'll obviously be working very closely with our partners across the one CGIAR. Thank you. So Danush mentioned that ICRA is funded by a grant from the World Bank. Yes, so we have a 60 million grant from the International Development Association. So this is quite a sort of novel way of funding such a project. And that funding, that generous support, is there to enhance the research and capacity building of CGR centres. But really, the project is about fulfilling the bank's commitment not only to the CGIAR, which President David Malpass made in 2019 at the Climate Change Summit, but also to African institutions, so specifically the African Food Security Leadership Dialogue, which is run by the African Union Commission and works to address food security crises under climate change. So ICRA really sort of accelerated a lot of its projects at the start of this year, but the World Bank is also in parallel launching lots of programs like the Food Security Resilience Program, or FSRP for short, which has been launched in West Africa, and ICRA is really looking to really kind of plug into the FSRP and work very closely with FSRP projects in West Africa, for example. And FSRP programs, I mean, talking about 570 million here, so these are really large IDA-funded projects. Thank you. Next one. So so that's kind of a bit of background on what we're trying to achieve. I just want to give a couple of examples of the kinds of innovations that we're delivering through to ICRA. So it was such a pleasure to go to visit the team in Ghana. Here are some photos from our visit, which involved a lot of field visits to see some of the projects we're delivering. So there was the Tuba community, which is about an hour's drive from the capital Accra, and there they were deploying new innovations that were trying to deal with pest management issues in a climate-smart, One Health way. And we then had a sort of community event and then a public forum to talk about how these climate-smart innovations were being taken up by farmers' organizations, by the women in the community, etc. So that was really fantastic. So next slide, please. Yeah. So the Ghana team are launching a One Health platform for climate-driven pests and disease. But they're doing so in a climate-smart way, so using technologies, processes, and practices that limit emissions but support climate adaptation and mitigation. And so we call it, CSIPM, so climate-smart integrated pest management. It's there to mediate the effects of climate change, but also crops and using sort of nature-based solutions to target pests. And part of that project also then involves elements of sustainable finance and broadening and deepening financial access to all social groups, particularly women and youth. Next slide. Okay, and then this is an example from Zambia. So this was taken a couple of months ago. So this was the announcement of the winners of the Accelerator grant that we launched in Zambia. So the Zambia team have an accelerator program. And Vita, next slide, please. So 12 businesses, agri-businesses, were selected at the program, and the grants were sort of organized in 5 bundles that support CSA and climate information services. And really, the grant there is to help these agribusinesses sort of increase their impact and sort of help them make connections across the broader Zambian economy. And it's also there to broaden access to investment, to make these agribusinesses more ready for investment, and to deploy them very quickly. And so there's lots of activity happening there, and there will be a few events later in this year where these agribusinesses will demonstrate the kind of progress they've made delivering these, and we hope to reach 300,000 Zambian farmers by the end of next year through the Accelerator program. And here's just a graph of some of the bundles if you're curious to see what they are in the Zambian context. Next slide, please. Okay, so those were 2 sort of in-depth examples. There are lots of other examples. Working with Reforum on climate risk management in agricultural extension services. South-to-South learning, so I mentioned earlier the regional work that we're doing, so broader than the countries themselves. And so some of our colleagues who lead on that regional work really focus on trying to have South-to-South learning and working in partnership across countries. Doing lots of stakeholder groups and stakeholder platforms, for example, in Mali, and other innovations. And here are just some pictures. So, next slide, please. So to get to the point of why ICRA backs the agriculture breakthrough, I mean, as you've seen from the slides, ICRA is really all about connecting and scaling for impact. It's quite an unusual CGIAR project because often the CGIAR has focused on the science, trying to discover innovations. We're kind of moving beyond that, and what we're trying to do is basically take innovations that have already been developed by other CGIAR centers, by other partners, and it's all about delivery and impact and scaling. We're not doing research on new innovations or new science, and we kind of feel like it's the agriculture breakthrough in practice. It's just about taking innovation and scaling it rapidly. So thank you.
Thanks, Reese. Thanks for giving an example. I mean, this is one of the challenges which I face in the global arena and policy process. Like, we can talk about some of these goals and processes, but we need examples to exemplify what they look like in practice. So ideally, from my perspective, we need to see more and more efforts like ICRA, like some of the projects that Andy described, like iFeed, as part of that breakthrough agenda to address the innovation gap that we face in agriculture. But Reese, you're not done yet. I have a question for you. Like what Gerard mentioned, we need to bring together different aspects of society. We need to bring researchers. We need to bring together policymakers. He mentioned 70% of the global economy covered under the breakthrough agenda. So it's not only about technology and research and scaling. It's also about societal movement. And you're the communications lead, and you have a lot of experience in that. And Andy mentions psychology, culture. How can we create a social movement around the breakthrough based on what is ICRA doing and what can we do beyond that?
Thank you, Danish. Absolutely agree with you. And in CCAS, so the previous project I mentioned, we worked with the GAIN on a campaign to engage youth, the pledge that they made there, and we absolutely see that reaching out to women, to youth, to marginalized groups is very important to that. And from the example from Ghana that you saw, and part of the work that the Ghana team are doing is not just deploying the innovations, but making sure that those innovations reach all parts of society. So you saw in some of the pictures, like parts of the public forums that they do, working with national media, working with youth champions, so social media influencers, to try and translate the work that we're doing, to kind of break it down for a non-technical audience, and making sure that it's getting out there through being disseminated, but not just the research, but also the key messages are being disseminated to all kinds of stakeholders, so that we can really try and engage action at both sort of social, political, and scientific level.
Thanks, Reese. Okay, thank you so much. We'll come back to you with some questions from the audience, but I just wanted to give the other panelists also the opportunity to share their introductory remarks. And we've heard about ICRA's ambitions reaching 1.5 million farmers by 2023, that's next year. And we've heard about farmer orientation, and I'd like to hear the farmer perspective. And for that, I'd like to introduce Ishmael Sunga. I made an error earlier. He's representing not 16, but 12 countries, the farmers in 12 Southern African countries, as the CEO of the Southern African Confederation of Agriculture Unions. But earlier today, Ishmael, you said to me something, if I may just share, as a quote which will always remain ingrained in my mind, and that's like, sometimes research and innovation can be perfected, but rejected. So I want to maybe put this challenge out to you. We've heard from the research perspectives what are the interesting projects, what's happening out there. But from a farmer perspective, what would you like to see from this Glasgow breakthrough?
Thanks, Danush, for that introduction and my quote earlier on. That was just before lunch. Maybe this was the effects of hunger. But let me try and explain myself on this one. It seems when farmers are talking, and perhaps I see myself as one of the farmers, although I farm the organizations that represent farmers, that we seem not to be in unison with researchers. I tend to get a bit of a disconnection when we speak, because we might be speaking the same subject, but somehow we don't seem to meet. And I think there are fault lines on this. Either the farmer is not completely understanding the research itself. It could be in the agenda setting. It might be in the design of research. it might be in the conduct of the whole research process, and indeed, it might be in the communication of research. The other side might think that we are in tune, and yet the other side does not think that we're in tune. So there, for me, lies a major problem of alignment between the researcher's psychic and the farmer's psychic. So sometimes we think we can do research for farmers, on farmers, and less about research with farmers. And I think there's need for a paradigm shift. I've said that, and controversially so sometimes, that science is not the only basis of evidence. That there are also other types of evidence. So when I hear expressions of science-based, I accept it, but I also say, no, but that's not too complete. There must be other basis of evidence, such as citizens' voices can also make change. And part of the problem, again, is when maybe it's not a fallacy, but almost like a fallacy that facts speak for themselves. That's what the researchers say. If they've gone through a very robust process with hypothesis and to go through the entire, it gives you the results that are speaking to a certain conclusion, then it should be obvious that policymakers should get it. But I don't think that is correct in many respects, particularly in developing countries. You really need that voice to be given legs, to be given those conclusions, those results, to be given a proper voice. Sometimes it's better for a farmer to communicate the results of a research that is so critical for their advancement themselves, and to say this is based on evidence that was collected together with ourselves in collaboration with researchers, to give you the technical sort of credibility, in case that is us. Sometimes policymakers react on the basis of the pressure they get from the constituencies that matter to them, and farmers happen to be one of those constituencies. So sometimes a piece of evidence might just be one for backing up, in case you are as so said who. You say, no, oh, by the way, there's some research that was done, but not necessarily to put in the forefront. So it talks about communication. How do we communicate also the outcomes of the research, and who should communicate that? It might actually be, I think my main theme is that in the whole process of setting the research agenda on what is it that we want to find out, what is it that we want to solve for, and designing it, implementing it, monitoring it, and getting the results out there and communicating them, it should be a co-created process that has all the stakeholders, particularly the farmers, describing also the process they feel is actually what is hurting to them. Sometimes they are not as good as perhaps researchers are in communicating that which hurts them. I don't believe that it should be farmer-driven only. I think it's a co-created activity in the sense that, I mean, you can really enrich the conversation if people are coming from different perspectives, different directions. If you don't set the sails right at the beginning about what is it that we are going to be researching on, it is going to be difficult. The point Danush said earlier on was that technical solutions are always important, yes, but sometimes they can be misplaced. I was giving him the example of an ox-drawn cart in India that I read a long time ago in literature that had wobbly wheels. It was just moving, but going forward, but very wobbly, as if the bearings were totally gone. And of course, a smart engineer came up with smart ideas and say, let's fix the bearings. And when the bearings were fixed, guess what happened? The thing broke because it was wooden wheels. So it could not negotiate itself against the stones and all that, which was an important parameter. If they had taken time to understand why this thing appears to be as rugged as it is, maybe there could have been some wisdom. The point being that talking together, understanding what the pain points are is important. And more importantly for us, understanding fundamentally that farmers are not a homogeneous category. When you speak about, as an example, the new kid on the block, soil, what value proposition can you give to a farmer, the majority of whom are farming to eat? They want to ship out as soon as another opportunity arises. What value proposition are you going? They are not there for the long term. They are not necessarily there for the economics that we think they are there for, and yet it's important for them to, which is different. So how do we differentiate our value propositions and factor that in the design of the projects that we want to do and the testing that we want to do? I believe even for those that farm to eat, that can be candidates for social safety nets. The safety nets can be engineered to pay them on the practice that will enhance the environment. They might not necessarily understand the outcomes of what they are doing, but as long as they are going to be getting the money that they are going to get out of the practice that they've been asked to comply with, that might actually give us an answer. We might also have to give them, those that are more commercially oriented, maybe the market is a better way of reaching onto them. Which brings me to the other point, really, about what is it, it's about communication that we are trying to sell. Are we selling carbon? Are we selling decarbonization? Are we selling climate change? Or are we selling an opportunity? Sometimes it's better to sell an opportunity, particularly if you're talking to a young generation of farmers, that there are opportunities that are there that you can get from development support, from this and that, because of the global system that we are in, rather than selling agriculture, rather than selling climate change, that if you do A, B, C, D, it will make the atmosphere cooler. That might not be the language that they hear, but that which makes them do business, that ultimately the outcomes of which is exactly what we're looking for. So I'm calling upon maybe greater cooperation between communicators and researchers and farmers to look at what narrative actually sells. Sometimes they're too direct, maybe too enthusiastically so, because we want to solve for a problem, but inadvertently we are also causing a problem for ourselves. Maybe the final point for now is farmers are so diverse and they're so differentiated, and they've got multiple needs, and sometimes we choose to look at them through the lens of climate smart agriculture. That's the one that we choose, and forgetting that they're an embodiment of all different types of pain points. Even in terms of climate, maybe the climate impact on agriculture might actually be less than the climate impact on other sources of livelihoods. But we choose to look at that particular angle, because that is what we are for. Maybe we should not be what we are for. We should be what they are there for. Understand them in an integrated way and design a solution which actually is integrated. And I think it's not too difficult. We have seen digital solutions that can actually be integrated, solutions that can deliver a lot of outcomes, could be financial outcomes, health outcomes, you name it. So let's look at those technologies, some of which are not as technical, that actually are able to provide us with an integrated model of delivery, which is speaking to the complexity of most of the farmers that are multi-human beings. And if one really needs to do things at scale and at speed, you can't run away from using digital solutions. And implicit in what I'm saying is that you can't run away from establishing digital backbone infrastructure in all the different areas, because information has become the primary source of risk management, climate or otherwise. And if you don't have it, and it also has a lot of core benefits. You become wiser, and you can also begin to challenge the status quo. And finally, innovation in policy is so fundamental. You can engineer policy to make things happen at scale, at speed, and that could be via tax rebates, that could be via establishment of digital infrastructure where it is not profitable, provide 10 years, maybe VAT or tax havens for companies to go and invest. There are a lot of innovations in my view. The problem is that innovation has tended to be, if I can use the word, hijacked by more the technical side, which is more the exciting. The socio-economic side, I think we need to bring it into balance so that we have a much more realistic and way of moving forward. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Ishmael. Thank you. Thanks for those enlightening words, and I've noted it down. 2 point. We are making notes, so we will feed back to the group that's preparing the State of Sectoral Transitions report, so we can capture some of these insights which come out from the panel. But in addition, just throwing this back at you, I mean, this is about the breakthrough agenda on agriculture. So if we have to go back to the farmer associations that you represent in 12 countries and ask them to support the agriculture breakthrough, what do you need from this group around here?
I think I'll avoid the word breakthrough. That's the first thing that I'm going to do, because I'm going to be asked, what is this breakthrough? And what do they see? Do they see it as a breakthrough in their eyes? I really want to imagine with them what would be the future like that they can attain by ensuring that they are farming for the long term. And maybe the answer is going to lie in the reward system in terms of payment of risk and reward, as well as in good agricultural practices. If I can sell that thing, that if you farm well, you will be well rewarded. And if you farm using good practice, you will additionally be rewarded. I think that will be the story that I want to tell. In this respect, I've spoken to you about trying to create a movement of 100,000 young carbon farmers in Southern Africa. But I'm not going to be calling them carbon farmers. No, I have to find the right narrative, because they need to be entrepreneurs and they need to be ICT enabled for them to be fair in doing what they want to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Ishmael. That's really helpful. So the point on communications and business models which attract people towards the breakthrough, that will be key to get more stakeholders on board. But now I want to move on to Jacqueline Makoka, who's the Kenya's national focal point on gender and climate change to the UNFCCC. She's the Deputy Director for Gender, working in the State Department under the Ministry of Public Service, Gender, Senior Citizens Affairs, and Special Programs. And Jacqueline, I want to start where Ishmael left off. You know, he said, you know, sometimes the whole innovation agenda can be hijacked by the technical people. And Reese also highlighted the importance of gender and social inclusion in this. So firstly, I'd like to hear from you on how you think, you know, what's written on your T-shirt. Can anybody see Jacqueline's T-shirt? Can you see there at the back? Can you stand up, Jacqueline? Yeah? Women's voice matters. You know, so how can we make sure that within this breakthrough agenda, how can we make sure that women's voice matters? So if you can share your insights, and then also more broadly around Kenya's engagement, how we can get countries in Africa on board, that'll be helpful as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm just picking up from where all the speakers have already talked about. And maybe just the point of communication and science. I'm one of those people who really fears those diagrams. I think I was not so good in science. So when we look at issues around agriculture, food systems, of course, there's a whole gender perspective to it. influenced by the different gender roles that people undertake, or rather how different populations interact with the agricultural practices. And in the African context, you can't run away from culture. So the issue of what was the tagline again? I think I really liked it, about research.
Culture eat strategy for breakfast.
Yes, culture eating strategy for breakfast. I think in the African context, it's really real, because how you bring about information really matters based on the cultural context. And from a gender perspective, right now there's the whole narrative about intersectionalities. And I liked the previous speaker who said, even when you look at the farmers, they're not homogeneous. So when you look at, from a gender perspective, when even you're addressing the youth are not homogeneous. So we have to look at the different intersectionalities and how they can even, their circumstances affect how they take up, whether it's research information or new technologies and all that. Because you can come up with a technological innovation and it's not taken up for various reasons. Could be, the socioeconomic status, which then influences priorities between buying maybe a smartphone for me to be able to utilize a certain technology and food at the table. What is the priority? So the socioeconomics then come into play. Issues around age. So if the farmers that Ishmael is talking about are maybe 50 years and above, how do you bring in, what kind of technology is easier for uptake for that age group, as opposed to if you're using younger farmers who could be more tech savvy when you compare to other groups. Again, in the African context, issues around access to and ownership of resources, and in this context, land. So even as, now from a gender perspective, if I want, for instance, women to participate in a certain agricultural trade, what are their land ownership rights, or what kind of land tenure system are they operating within? And then also, as we look at science and innovation, I think the place of indigenous knowledge is very, very important. Where do we place that? And I like also the example of the ox-drawn cart. So there must have been traditional knowledge that should have been built upon by the engineer in order to make something that really works. So I think even as we look through, the breakthrough, I think it's good to look at indigenous knowledge. And also, when we look at indigenous knowledge, we look at the different gender roles in terms of passing on indigenous knowledge, because we know that in the African communities, women are the primary socialization agents. So in terms of passing on this indigenous knowledge to generations, women play a very critical role. So how can we position them in a way that in their nurturing role of the children, the families, this knowledge is passed on through generations, and also this in line with the education systems, because we know that traditionally and even right now, there are high levels of inequalities between men and women in our African communities, and I'm sure even at global level to an extent. So how do we deal with those inequalities so that then participation in the different agricultural practices and engagements can be equitable? Now, from a government perspective, of course, I know that there could be some uniquenesses in African governments, but generally, you find that there are a lot of similarities. I think as we look through now, I'm shy. I don't know whether to use the breakthrough terminology or go by what Ishmael was saying. We used to use appropriate terminologies. I think some of the things that would work, and I'm sure these are general in nature, through research and collaborations, with research institutions like ICRA, I think it's very important to look at the current context as relates to climate change, develop, appropriate seeds for agriculture to improve on yields, and also look at the issues of soils. I think he mentioned that. What can be done to improve, productivity, also bearing in mind the erratic rainfall, because most of the African farmers, I think, for a long time have been depending on rain-fed, have been undertaking agriculture, relying mostly on rain. But with the erratic nature of the rainfall, what are some of the things that we can do? Looking at the type of seeds that we are using, but also looking at even issues of water harvesting where appropriate, and irrigation practices. Also, improvement of market access, very important. And then, reforms in terms of land ownership. Again, culture, I talked about access to and control over resources. There's been a push, and I would give an example of Kenya. Right now, our government is in the process of, driving reforms in the land sector to look at issues around ownership, which of course traditionally have been discriminatory against women. So there are land reforms with the hope that probably it would contribute to better yields where women are largely involved in agricultural practices, so that then they can see value for that engagement, as opposed to when they are just used as laborers and not really benefiting from the crop yields. But most importantly, I think we need a multi-sectoral approach to reach those goals that we are envisaging in the breakthrough process. So research, very important. Of course, government is a driver of policies, both development and implementation. The trade sector to market the farmer yields. And lastly, infrastructure. Because, again, I give an example from our country where you find that there are times when, a section of the country could do so well in terms of getting produce, and then just because of the infrastructure, the delay, because of the poor road infrastructure, transporting the yield to the markets, you find that the yields that are perishable, go to waste just because of the infrastructure. So I think that is the kind of multi-sectoral approach that if all these sectors can work together, then I think we can walk, more steadily to that sustainable goal. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thank you, Jacqueline. So I'm really hoping that Kenya is endorsing the breakthrough agenda and the agriculture breakthrough. I also know that there is a lot happening in Kenya in terms of the innovation hub and the agriculture transformation that's happening at the moment. Is there anything you'd like to add on that that relates to the breakthrough?
I think from a Kenyan perspective, I think we are supportive of the breakthrough agenda. And as I said, the multi-sectoral approach towards it, I think is very important. And maybe if I could also give an example of what is happening currently, Kenya Kenya's development agenda is addressed through what we call the Vision 2030 blueprint. And right now we are in the process of developing, it's implemented through a 5-year medium-term plan. So we are in the process of the last one, the medium-term plan 3 is expiring this 2022. So we are in the process of developing the 4th medium-term plan. And the interesting thing is that just like gender, climate change is now a cross-cutting issue across the sectors. So I recently participated in consultations, sector consultations, where we are endeavoring to integrate climate change, and one of them, of course, being the agricultural sector, just like the gender and social inclusion sector. So I think when we also look at it from that angle, I think it's going to be the breakthrough agenda also benefits from this initiative. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. That's really helpful. So we're going to turn to you now, so to the audience. Vita, maybe, yeah. So Vita's going to bring you some microphone. I also have one. So we're going to collect a few questions from you that you have for the panelists. So who'd like to go first? Just raise your hands. Anybody? No questions. Oh, that's really great. So maybe, yeah, Bernard.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to the panel for some great presentations. So maybe a couple of questions. So, yeah, sorry about that. I'm Bernard Stormyr. I work in Yara International, a Norwegian-based but a global fertilizer company. So, one question to the scientists in particular. So, I find the level of engagement and ambition that you're talking about is tremendously inspiring. But since we're looking towards COP27, which is a COP of implementation, will we see visible improvements in rural livelihoods and yield levels on basis of the work that's being done? And then the second question, maybe primarily to Ishmael. So, as the upcoming COP27 is, as mentioned, a COP for implementation, how can we as companies engage with farmers to support you in improving the livelihoods and yields and also the environmental performance of the farms?
Thanks, Bernard. Are there any more questions? Just give. Okay. If not, we can just dive in. So, Andy, would you like to take that first question on the yield levels, and then we turn to Ishmael?
Yeah, sure. It's a very good question. I mean, I haven't looked so much at that at kind of small-scale yields and what's happening at the kind of field level, if you like, or even the district level. So the way in which we're looking at implementation is more to do with demonstrating the value of policy implementing policies that support higher yields. So, perhaps that's happening to some extent. Certainly the evidence that we've got from when the data that we use to calibrate the models and to project forward suggests it's not happening enough. Maybe that's the more direct answer to the question. As far as I know, that's not happening enough. But I think that the evidence base is now starting to be there to demonstrate the value of, if policies can be implemented effectively, and I know that's a big if, but this is about the evidence base that says if you can do that, then the benefits will be very large, and that's what our results show, that yields going up by, not surprisingly, but large factors, and so it's showing numerically the value of effective policy in that direction. So that's kind of where I sit, is more at that evidence base for the improvement, and then hopefully that then is the kind of helps to fuel the kind of breakthrough in terms of saying
it is worth investing in this. We have seen that, at least according to the model projections and all of the other experts and stakeholders that have worked on the project, to show that, you know, if we do that, then things will get significantly better. Yeah, but I don't have an answer sort of more directly about what's happening currently.
Just to add on what Andy says, there is recent talk, and Yara was talking about it a couple of weeks ago, about this way of sort of payment or value that is based on the practice that is nature positive, rather than the productivity, or both. Quite often, our measuring system is more about high productivity, maybe regardless of, not necessarily that, but that there's need for a mechanism to ensure that there is also payment of value that is based on how you practice agriculture. And I think that can be monitored. I'm sure there are clever ways from people clever than myself to do that. And that could add a different dimension. If you combine productivity-based type of reward system with practice-based, that you've managed to look after your soils very well in that, then you are going to have additional payments. I think it's important just to shift the paradigm a bit. Otherwise, it becomes so obsessive in terms of productivity, and then you mine the soil, and at the end of the day, not sustainable. So But in terms of companies engaging, I think this is where we are not getting. I think there's a lot of research that companies do, but they don't gather in research symposiums like these ones. And I'm sure there was a lot of research that were done when the cell phone technology was developed, and then it spread without a development agency trying to juice it up. It just happened. So there must be some innovative ways that the private sector itself is sitting with. That might not have to go through a process of hypothesis, a process of an academic published reference journal. That still works. And I'm sure there are a lot of farmers out there who are also doing the same. I'm not denigrating one and the other. I'm just saying, let's try and see how we can get the capital, the assets that the private sector has, that does not have to go via serious academic rigor, and to produce a world-class transformative technology of cell phone that is running at cheaper and cheaper costs. And that's not your question. Your question is, how can we work together on that? I think that there's two fronts. I mean, there's always a vexing issue, which is an elephant in the room most of the time, about how agreements between farmers and the private sector are configured. They always get the raw end of the stick as a farmer. So that part of introducing principles and values of fairness and equity in the construction of working agreements, it could be off-take agreements, it could be whatever, that if we can enshrine that, farmers might be able to claw back even more than 20% just from negotiating better. It could be through moral suasion, and it could be. Then the other really is the deployment of digital technology to ensure that there is openness and transparency and accountability. It could be blockchain, could be used to tag, to see how things. So I see the intersection of that. It could be a research thing, or it could be a private sector thing. But more importantly, we need to share the entire risk. I mean, it's an ironic position in my view that those that are actually supposed to be driving the food systems will end up themselves being hungry, and the rest being okay. So there is something fundamentally wrong about the principles that we use to drive change in the process. But we need to go into partnerships. Farmers are not necessarily good at running businesses corporate businesses, but it does not prevent them from having, as an example, a share ownership scheme. Rabobank, as an example, is owned by as a cooperative, but there could be clever ways of not one that is built on a supplier or maybe supplier and customer is fine. But the problem that we always face, and I need to be frank and truthful about it myself, is that farmers, companies normally see farmers as consumers of their products, not as business partners. So that is a fundamental problem, because where they get the money, whether they're in profit or not, as long as the thing is bought, that's fine. They always accuse us as farmers' organizations, what's your business there? Because we're standing between their customer and them. But I think it just calls for cooperation based on good principles of equity and fairness, and negotiating better, and knowing that we are in it all together, and that it is the nature for all of us, and we should all pay the cost and all pay the rewards, get the rewards. Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Ishmael. Any more questions? Yes, one. There. Do you have?
Yeah, hello. My name is Nico. I'm with GeoFoods, working on just transition processes. My question is, so these breakthrough models, I guess they were done pre-war, right? So how does the war affect these models and also the implementation, and what are, for example, like the very much needed short-term solutions?
Thank you. It's appreciated. Are there any other questions or comments? Should be the sure.
If I can just, thanks. If we can just make a comment, because I was listening to Ishmael really carefully about how we understand and engage with farmers and farmers' perspectives. And it's just worth saying that I think in terms of what we're trying to think about in terms of the agricultural breakthrough is to pay attention to a set of things and bring them together at a scale that's really important. I take the point on the war, and I'm interested in the panel's conversation on that. But one of the things that the agriculture breakthrough wants us to pay attention to is the rates of adoption of practice by farmers, right? So that is tangible evidence that people are acting in the interest that they see as most important to them. Right? So, but it's the rates of adoption of solutions that are climate resilient, that enhance their productivity. So that's one of the things we want to pay attention to. Another one, for example, is the extent to which there are public and private partnerships developing around those solutions at a range of scale. Another one is the extent to which global agricultural research is focusing on climate resilient solutions. Another one is about the way in which climate funds are focusing on agricultural research. So I think that basket of things we want to pay attention to has the perspectives of farmers right at the center of it. And I just wanted to reassure you on that, because it's that sort of we'll see breakthrough when farmers are adopting more of those practices because they're acting in the interest that they see as important. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Gerard, for that comment. And I've just been informed we just have 7 minutes more left. So I'll just maybe hand over to Jacqueline and Reese for any closing comments. And then I want to come to you, Andy, if you want to quickly talk about answer the question on, because you had that slide on what is a breakthrough, and maybe you can address the comment. So Jacqueline, any response or any general closing comments?
Okay, I don't think I have any question to respond to, but I just, also appreciating the information that has come through this discussion, because much as I'm a panelist, I'm also learning quite a bit.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
Okay, Reese?
Thank you, Danish. Yeah, no, as you saw from the slides, I recently visited the Agri team in Ghana, and there I met with some young social media influencers who worked for the African Union and other organizations, and we were just chatting over a beer and say, how can we reach young people with messages about climate smart agriculture? And he said, well, you're assuming that every young person who lives in the countryside wants to be a farmer. There definitely needs to be a two-way conversation about expectations and hopes and future prosperity, and we do try and support these initiatives that have more of that use, for example, social media as a conversation rather than just to simply broadcast. Although we do have lots of projects that, for example, Samba Shape Up in Kenya, which incorporates messages about climate-smart agriculture into TV soap operas, into radio shows that try and sort of get messages out there to the community. But it's been really interesting hearing from Ishmael and Jacqueline and others about talking to each other. And one of the innovations, you could argue whether a multi-stakeholder platform is an innovation. Perhaps the way it's been managed is an innovation, particularly in Zambia, for example, is they have a multi-stakeholder platform that brings together the private sector, farmers, scientists, and tries to drive a conversation about the need for innovations and where they need to come and how they can be delivered, etc. And that's been very enlightening and very informative. And so at the kind of the country level, we're doing that. But at the global level, I mean, we've been really thrilled at the IGRA team to have been involved in a process of formulating the African Union new climate change strategy that's about to be signed off by all member states, which for the first time in 20-odd years will really guide the continental level policies and investments on climate change, and we were able through ICRA to inform the agriculture parts of that strategy. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Reese. And just very quickly, just to mention, we have 4 minutes left, so Andy, 1 minute.
Okay, so this was on the effect of the war on the agricultural breakthrough. Any successful implementation of the agricultural breakthrough needs to be not just mindful, but needs to be actively responsive to and resilient to shocks, of which the war is one example. So you're not implementing it unless you're kind of war-proof, to put it that way, or to any of the other shocks that we're seeing. So that's, I would say, an integral part of any successful response to this call for an agricultural breakthrough, irrespective of exactly what happens. Increasingly we can be sure that more things like that are going to happen. We're seeing more shocks in this world of that sort of COVID. We don't know where the next shock or what the next shock will be. Climate will be some of it, but we can be fairly sure that they will come, and that's what we need to be building resilience to.
Thanks, Andy. And maybe you can speak with Andy after to discuss that in more detail if you'd like. Ishmael, any 30 seconds for any closing comments?
No, just to acknowledge the point about the measurements that are being put in place and the importance of ensuring that there is sufficient voice and representation in the crafting of the different matrices, which we'll be happy to be involved in, as we have had before. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishmael. And I have the task of closing the session in the next 2 minutes, so I'll just try to do that. So I hadn't realized that the quote which I shared, it's not my own quote, but something I came across in interviews as part of my PhD, got quite a lot of interest, apparently. So just to say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And while I was hearing all these interventions from panelists, I was thinking, how can we actually change this? I'm putting a problem out there. I spent 4 years studying this problem, but what's the solution, right? And so how can we change the culture so that it doesn't eat strategy for breakfast and we can get this breakthrough achieved? And I just made some notes and I just wanted to share that with you. So firstly, in terms of research and innovation, we really need to change our culture. I say our culture because I'm thinking do tank, so we're still connected to research but trying to get action. And how can we do that? And I think the panelists made some really interesting observations on how to do that. So greater emphasis on engaging with stakeholders, including stakeholders in that research process. As Ishmael mentioned, co-creation. Greater emphasis on communications, which is essential in terms of achieving research outcomes. And as Ishmael also mentioned, the role of business. We cannot go to a farmer saying, adopt the breakthrough agenda. We need to be able to put forward a business case which relates to the breakthrough agenda, and the farmer is able to adopt it and realize benefits. And Jacqueline's point really about inclusion and cultural sensitivities and listening to people, all those different aspects, we need to include them as part of a new culture in research and innovation so that we don't eat strategy for breakfast. But we still need the strategy piece as well. So we need a strategy which is going to get us to achieve the breakthrough goals, the breakthrough goal of reaching all farmers with sustainable agricultural practices and technologies. How do we achieve that? And again, the panel had some great insights, including from Andy, the role like participatory scenarios methods, how can that be adopted as part of that strategy? Ishmael mentioned the role of digital solutions, carbon farming, and I think we need all of these elements as part of that strategy to achieve the change that the breakthrough seeks to achieve. But we need to work both on strategy and culture to make this a success. So that's my summary, and I would like to thank you for attending and being engaged. I hope you found this useful. And also thanking the co-organizers of CliMeet, the University of Leeds, SACAU, ICRA, FCDO, for coming together to organize this event just the day after the World Environment Day. Thank you, everyone. And those who are interested, tomorrow CliMeet will also have an event here in this room at 6:30 p.m. together with the Netherlands, which looks at action on the food, climate, and water nexus. So please come on for that. Thank you.
Standing up, sitting down?
Sitting down.
Sitting down, yeah, because we're like... Oh, yeah. I did when you first said it, and then I realised actually. Oh, I see, but that just, I think it just had something about CSA and CSA really got to. I just took it from the breakthrough website, copied and pasted what was there. And so then I took it out once I realised that the Gerald couldn't do that. But then once I realised that actually the answer was